We've been talking about the election seasons and how to get through it. We're looking for change, and we think we know the way. We all have an opinion, right? My way's best. I'm going to vote and hopefully get it that way, yes? And perhaps you did, perhaps you didn't. We don't always win when we vote, right? And it's been an opportunity for us to try and use this scripture from Micah up here on the screen, where the prophet is saying, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. So we're at the third phrase, to walk humbly with your God today. And I thought about this story that's pretty violent, actually, to make our point. It's from the book of Daniel. How many times do I do sermons from Old Testament? It's been a while, yeah? Well, from the book of Daniel in chapter 3, there's this king. He's kind of an egomaniac. His name is King Nebuchadnezzar. There's a name for you. What are you supposed to call him for short? Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar decided that he was going to have a huge golden statue built in his kingdom. Not just a 10-foot statue. We're talking a 90-foot statue of gold. And the rule was when the bells and the whistles and the zithers and you name it, whatever kind of instruments they had back in that day, chimed and sang, everyone in the kingdom was required to bow down to this statue. And if they didn't, they would be thrown into a fiery furnace to meet their death. What a sweet king. And so he had the statue built. He introduced it to everyone. He told them the rules. The music went off. Everyone bowed, except 3 guys, 3 Jews. You're going to love this. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Heard those names before? When I was a kid, there was actually a musical that we did in our church called It's Cool in the Furnace. Don't get me started. We wore sunglasses. We were pretty cool. So this story is pretty well known in mainstream Christianity. And when it turns out that the bells went off and everyone bowed except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, some astrologers happened to notice and had them hauled in front of the king and told them that they had disobeyed. And when he reminded them of the rules, that they were meant to bow down and worship this idol, they said, we can't do that. We have our God that we idolize. That's not the word they used. They probably used devotion, that they put their faith in, that was really the only God in the universe as far as they were concerned. And they would not do God injustice. And they weren't going to worry about what would happen to them because they believed that their God would save them. And if the God didn't save them from their fiery furnace, they still were going to stand up and only worship God. Well, the king wasn't having any of that. So he had them tied up. He had the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal. And he had his soldiers carry the 3 men towards the furnace. And before they even got there, the soldiers died because the heat was so hot. And the 3 tumbled into the furnace. But as the king watched, he saw them get up. Their bindings were broken. They were walking around in the furnace, unharmed, unsinged. And there was a 4th person in the furnace with them. And as he looked, he said, wait a minute, who's that? It looks like a son of the gods. Why are they not dying? Why are they not being burned up? He was amazed. And so he called for them to come out. The 3 men came out, and he said, it must be their God that has saved them. So I'm praising your God. And from now on, all of you, no man on the planet shall speak ill of their God, or you'll be thrown into the furnace. He just couldn't get past that issue. And on top of that, he promoted them in their work in Babylon. So, of course, in Unity, we look at these scriptures metaphysically, meaning what's not the literal story happening here, but how is this story happening in me? How does the king express itself as an aspect of my own consciousness, and the furnace, and the fourth person, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the statue? So, of course, we're going to talk about that. Let's look at some metaphysical interpretation. Up here on the screen, we first have the character of the king. Think of him as your own human willfulness. And that big old gold statue that was erected, think of that as when we put or give our power to the personal self, to the material realm. That the expressions of the three Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, actually represent humility. Walk humbly with our God. Humility. Meshach represents love. Abednego represents spiritual understanding in us. That fiery furnace, that's whenever we face the threat of loss or suffering in our life. And that fourth person always shows up in some way in metaphysical interpretation. The Christ within us. That conscious awareness of our oneness with God. And if we look at all of these characters and their meanings combined, here's a brief explanation. First of all, imagine that you are not fazed by any threat of suffering or loss. And instead, when we walk humbly with God, when we understand the power of the divine within, our Christ nature guides us to rise above circumstances, expressing our divine potential. You'll be promoted. Walk humbly with our God. That's a statement that's been said in many different ways in the scriptures. And one of the ways that Jesus put it was on his Sermon on the Mount from chapter 5 of Matthew. One of the things he said was, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Meek, also like walking humbly. Yes or no? How many times have you heard the word meek in a derogatory way? I'm going to ask Christina to just throw some of these examples up here on the screen. When we think of meekness, we might think of insignificant, lowly, self-deprecating, can't assert themselves, run from conflict, inconsequential. They give up their goals in order to serve others. Meek. And yet Jesus is saying that this person is the one that will inherit the earth. That just doesn't make sense unless there is another definition for the word meek. It's one of the weirdest terms in the Bible and in the dictionary. I was going for the dictionary. In the dictionary, it's actually described as positive and negative. It's a paradox. But when we talk about meekness metaphysically, here's a definition up here on the screen. A recognition that the personal man by himself, the ego, the lesser self, by himself is ineffectual. When we try and do things from our human consciousness, from our human abilities, we are usually ineffectual. And Jesus knew this, which is why he said several times, like in the book of John chapter 5, he said, "I of myself, my human self, can do nothing." He said, "The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works." Can you see how he knew the difference between ego and spirituality? How his human self was not the same as his Christ nature. And he knew which one to devote himself to give his attention to. So think of walking humbly with God or meekly on the earth as an opportunity for us to release the need to conquer the situation or other people. Walking humbly is about being open to divine ideas instead of just scrambling, looking back through all your textbooks, trying to figure out what you've learned in school to give you the answer. Walking humbly with God is not about struggling, but it's about allowing Spirit to do its work in our life. The meek who inherit the earth are the ones that are respectful and courteous rather than arrogant. The meek that inherit the earth are the ones that see each other equally. I am no better and no worse. We are all seen in the eyes of God as perfect and whole and complete. And I see you that way too. So being meek doesn't mean that you're lowly in rank. It means you have figured out to stand in your spiritual power, to recognize your oneness with that Christ consciousness within you. That's what it means to be meek. And that is as powerful as you can get. You know, there's a Zen story. We're going all over the books today. Let's move from the Bible to one of the many stories of Zen masters. It's a story about during the civil wars in feudal Japan, where an invading army would quickly sweep into town and take control. And in one particular village, everyone fled just before the army arrived. Everyone except the Zen master. Curious about this old fellow, the general went to the temple to see for himself what kind of man this master was. But when the general wasn't treated with the deference and submissiveness to which he was accustomed, the general burst into anger. "You fool!" he shouted as he reached for his sword. "Why, I oughta. Don't you realize you're standing before a man who could run you through without blinking an eye?" But despite the threat, the master seemed unmoved. "And do you realize," the master replied calmly, "that you are standing before a man who can be run through without blinking an eye?" At that, the general threw down his sword and begged the master to take him as a disciple. There's a statement from Felicia Searcy's book, Do Greater Things, on the screen. She said, "The truly humble exude a might that demands the respect of even the most ferocious fighter." Our power lies in our meekness. Our power lies in our surrender of our ego. Our power lies in recognizing that it's the motive toward revealing our divine potential rather than the motive to reveal our human nature that gives us power. So what's our motives? Pay attention to what's our motive. You know, a lot of times we have this need to prove that we're the smartest person in the room. I know. I remember I was in my baptismal class in the 6th grade when you get to go before the board of trustees and they ask you all these hard questions. "I know," I would say. "I know," I would say. "I know," I would say. And finally one of the board members said, "Kitty, we know you know. How about if you give someone else a chance?" I was so excited I was born to be a minister, what can I say? But there was also probably a little ego working there. I knew it all. That is not walking humbly before our God. How about instead of proving our knowledge, our head knowledge, that instead our motive is to tap into that intuitive nature, that Christ voice within us that has the highest point of view. What is your motive? Is your motive about keeping in control of the situation and everything goes your way? Or is it about opening up to see what Spirit has in store? Where is the highest good in this situation? Maybe I don't always know it all. Is my motive to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized, or is it to take a step back, to just be still and allow others to be seen? Check in with your motive and find out if you're needing to be right even when you're not, or own your mistakes. You're going to know your motive is from ego when it's uncomfortable in the way that it feels. So if you're trying to figure out that you're insisting in order to protect yourself, in order to get your needs met, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel tense and stressed out. It's going to feel worrying or embarrassing even. What is your motive in expressing your power? Is it of the ego or is it of Spirit? There is a model that a man named Gurdjieff created to help us understand our psychology. And it's another perfect example of metaphysical interpretation, so I thought I'd use it just to drive the point home today. He uses this picture up here on the screen, and he has each one of these elements of the picture as aspects of ourself. So Anybody want to guess what the carriage represents? The body. This is what carries us around on this earth. That's the body. How about the horse? What do you think the horse represents? Our emotions. Our emotions that tend to run away with us, right? Also, there's the driver. What do you think he is? The ego, the intellect. And the passenger? Spirit, our higher self, the Christ within. So when we look at just this literal picture, think about the day when that's how people got around. What if you're the driver? And you realize, too much time on Facebook. I better get in my seat on the carriage and take my master wherever he wants to go. You know what? I think it's Tuesday. We probably are heading to the library. So he gets in his carriage and he starts to drive and he realizes, I am a little late because I was on Facebook. So he's driving a little bit quickly. The horse is getting exhausted. We're going around the corner. The carriage is on 2 wheels. And then we take the right, but oh, wait, that's not the way. And then we take a left, but no, that's not the way. And then we run into a dead end. We're completely lost. The horse is exhausted. The master's just sitting there quietly, saying nothing. So how many times has this happened to us? We get up in the morning, we think of our to-do list. Oh my Lord, I do not want to meet with this person. Oh my gosh, I've got to get my hair cut and I've got to color my hair and it's going to be forever before I get to the things I need to really do today. There's so many things on our to-do list that we've completely forgotten to check in, to find out what Spirit has in store for us, where we really need to go today, how we really need to get there. So the question is, are you letting the driver, the intellect, the ego, take the lead down the wrong path and never wind up where you're really intended to go? Or here's what we're called to do. We're supposed to open the door of the carriage before we even leave the house and say, Master, where are we headed? What's on the agenda today? What's the best route to take? How can I walk humbly with that inner Christ spirit and get to the place that really serves the highest good involved? Have you ever thought of doing that? That's what winds up expressing the power of God within you, is when you begin by being meek in the presence of the Christ consciousness. In other words, giving way, making way for it. You're going to have lots of opportunities to walk humbly with God in your life. Most of them have to do with running into challenges or fears or upsets in your life. So for instance, when your body is struggling physically, if the driver was in charge or the horse was, running loose, we'd be upset, our heart would be palpitating, we'd be worried about how we're going to get past this illness in our body. We're going to feel depressed, run down. All of these things because instead of walking humbly with God, we're trying to control it through our human abilities. But instead, we could start the day by meditating on the truth of God as my health. When we think of health from spiritual perspective, we think of the divine power of life, which is always present in us. So instead of giving attention to that which is a sickness in our being, the illness, we look at the allness of life, the fullness of God in our bodies. That is how we make way for that power to move through us. To be humble, to be meek when it comes to healing the body, is to recognize it is not I, but the power, the Christ, the Spirit of God within me that will do this work. And then we remind ourselves by changing our thoughts on a regular basis. So we've got some affirmations to say today. When we're struggling with illness, for instance, up here on the screen, let's say these words together. I seek first the source of strength and wholeness, and I inherit God's power. Let's say you're facing a shortage in your life. You checked your checkbook register, and it's looking kind of low. You've got a big payment coming up, and it's very possible that the best answer to this is beg, borrow, or steal. At least that's what our ego thinks. But we're here to walk humbly with our God, which means to be meek, to take a step back in our human abilities, our human knowledge, and instead lean into that presence of infinite supply that is everywhere present. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that infinite abundance that is spiritual substance. It's the omnipresence of God that becomes everything that we need in our life. That spiritual substance is our daily bread, and it's always present in us. To walk humbly with God, to be meek and inherit the earth, is to know where your source of good is and comes from, presents from, and then we don't have to worry about our daily bread. Let's speak this affirmation together. I walk humbly in the realm of infinite supply and gratefully receive my good. How many times have we had someone upset us? We just had an election. Did you have somebody upset you? Did you think someone was trying to take your good from you? Is it possible that if we fight back, we might win now? Will it serve us to be angry, to try and make them look bad, to maybe even hurt them in some way before they can hurt us? That's not walking humbly with my God. It's trusting that the power of God will take us beyond anything that the other side is doing. Walking humbly with our God, being meek, is about allowing the presence and the power of the one omnipotence, all power, to do its work in our life. It does not matter whether someone is doing the exact opposite of what we want and they won or not, because they're not our source of good. There's only one power, and it's God's goodness, and it's for all of us. There is enough to provide for each one of us. Seek first the kingdom, and these things shall be added to us. Let's say this together. Are you ready? Back up one. Back up one. There it is. Together. I walk humbly in the love of God, and all things work together for good. So, we're seeking first the kingdom with a few more scriptures, and then we'll be done. Think of these words. They came from Jesus, they came from the Apostle Paul, and they're all saying the same thing. Let's say them together. From John 14:10. It is not I, but the Spirit within who does the work. From Romans 8. To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego set their mind on the life, the Spirit of God. From 1 Corinthians, we have received the Spirit that is from God, so we may understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. And to the Philippians, one of my favorites. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Finally, what Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I know that it can seem a little nerve-wracking to take a step back when you're facing your challenges in life. John, do you have a question? Set the mind on the flesh. Such a good question. What does it mean to set the mind on the flesh? What do you guys think? Okay. Thinking of ego, the physical self, it's basically putting your faith in the material realm. The flesh is the physical. So when we put our faith in our bank account, in a diagnosis, we put our faith in, a partner in life who's going to save us. These are putting our faith in temporary things, physical things. But if we seek first the kingdom, if we put our minds first on the spiritual nature of God's life, strength, supply, love, wisdom. Start there, and all these things will be added to us. Great question, John. Thank you for asking that. Let's take some time in meditation and see if we can't connect our thoughts, connect the dots with those qualities of the divine. Let's just take a moment to close our eyes and find a comfortable position in our chair. We'll put our mind on the flesh for a minute just to relax it so it doesn't get in our way. Just scan down through the body, and if you see any tense spots, breathe some life, some spirit, some love into it. think about that body and how often you may worry about it or even be upset with it because it's not doing what you want. How do we walk humbly with God as we think about our body? Notice the breath that's moving through you, that has been moving through you since the moment you were born. The breath of life that is truly the spirit of life moving through you. I give thanks for this life, this divine strength and wholeness. And I thank this physical body for the work that it does, allowing me to have this human experience. It is first and always divine life that allows me to live. And that presence of God as life never fails. As I think of my experience in this material world and all the things that I have, I imagine putting any one of those things under a microscope, and what do I see? Space. The invisible that is the source of the visible is the divine presence of God. It is not mine to struggle, to worry, to create this daily bread, but simply allow it with gratitude and joy, with relief and faith. It is done to me as I believe. The omnipresence of God and good never fails. Is there something in my mind that I cannot solve? A question that seems to keep me from the answer? I seek first the kingdom, the divine mind, the omniscience of God. I live and move and have my being in the mind of God. As I ask the Spirit within, that still small voice, it is given. As I seek first divine wisdom, I find it. If in this moment I am struggling in a relationship, I choose to walk humbly with my God. the source of divine love, everywhere present. I turn away from the fight and look toward God, the power that brings harmony to all relationships. Divine love never fails. In every circumstance of my life, I remember I walk humbly with my God. I allow divine life and love and substance and intelligence to freely do its perfect work in my life. And as I meekly open my heart to the power and presence of God, I inherit God's infinite goodness, and all is well. This is the truth of my being, and now I let it be.